The Florida Podcast Network, the voice of Florida.
From Mallory Square in Key West to the Governor's Mansion in Tallahassee and all points beyond, you're listening to the Florida Beer Podcast, powered by FloridaBeerBlog.com, your source for all things related to the craft beer community in the Sunshine State. And now your host, Dave Butler.
We are starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. Hopefully that will exist very well for us, but we are going to keep going on with our special coronavirus episodes of the Florida Beer Podcast, powered by FloridaBeerBlog.com. This is Dave, your host and author, and I hope that you are, quick plug, watching the Sunshine State Happy Hour that we are doing with my producer Steve and people from all over the country at 6 p.m. Eastern on our Facebook page, facebook.com/FLBeerBlog. A couple weeks ago, we actually brought in the owner of Hyperion Brewing Company. They are in the Springfield neighborhood of Jacksonville. And right before the interview happened, I actually got a communication from Main and Six Brewing, which is about a block and a half, maybe 2 blocks down the street, from their owner, Dennis Espinosa, who has been gracious enough to spend a little time coming on the podcast to describe a little bit more about what's going on in Jacksonville as the coronavirus quarantine starts to lift. Dennis, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Absolutely, and thank you for having me.
Well, absolutely. And I know one of the reasons that you reached out is that you wanted to really promote not just craft beer in general, but craft beer within Jacksonville. And I think when a lot of people look at craft beer in the state of Florida, most of the attention heads to Tampa, St. Pete, the Tampa Bay area. But I know I personally have always said that one of the biggest cities, if not number one, number two, kind of fighting with Tampa, is Jacksonville and the greater Duval area. So to start off with, is this a fight that you continually have to have? Do people still not really understand exactly everything that's going on in Jacksonville? Or is the beast just so big that you don't need to and everybody just appreciates what it has?
I think it's the first of the two. Jacksonville, does live sort of in the shadow of Tampa. I think most cities probably craft beer wise in the state of Florida do. Now, I want to say Jacksonville's greater metro area probably has maybe the second most breweries comparative to Tampa, St. Pete, Clearwater. I could be wrong. Maybe Miami-Dade, Broward might have more than us, but we have, I want to say, over 20 now, 22 or 23 if you include going down towards St. Augustine. So, yeah, it is hard, I guess, grapple with spotlight and living in the shadow of Tampa. There are a lot of really, really, really good breweries in Tampa. So, for me, and, I know the owner of Ardwolf real well, Praven, some of the conversations we have is to try and it's not necessarily take or steal that away from them, but also highlight that Jacksonville also is a good epicenter for good beer and that we're just as good as they are. We may not have as many, I guess, well-known breweries as that area does, but it doesn't, I guess, take away from what we do here. And so that's always been a goal of mine. The last 2.5 years I've been open was to, actively take part in competitions so that there's some affirmation and acknowledgement that Jacksonville has good beer so that our presence is known and can sort of kind of hang with the big dogs down there. Again, get our city and name out there that we are a, good craft beer hub.
Mm-hmm. And you've got some amazing breweries, but it's funny, you and the other breweries that are in the area, Hyperion, for example, kind of came around the same time, but you came into a craft beer community that had already sort of been dominated by the two big boys in town being Intuition and Bolt City. So was it difficult to sort of come into that, or did you have a good enough vision for what Main and Six was going to be that was separate from the big boys and separate from Ardwolf and separate from people like, go a little bit farther south, and Engine 15 and Veterans United, people like them?
Right. So the answer is a little bit of both. Yeah. Our goal was to not necessarily get into distro, which we haven't. We knew we were going to start at a moderate, maybe small size. We're a 5-barrel brewery. And so we knew that we were going to be more of a neighborhood brewery. And I did a lot of research. I joined the Brewers Association, our national guild, really early on once we started planning and finding, looking for properties to get as much information from them. And they have a very, very large wealth of information for those wanting to start a brewery. So the trends, even early on, 4 or so years ago when we first started this, 4.5 years, when we were beginning to look, they had information that everything was trending more towards a neighborhood brewery versus a distribution or even a regional brewery, which takes time to become and get to. So our goal was to be different than them with respect to where we're going to focus, not just our energy for clientele, but how we were going to get people in the door. So yeah, the goal is when you're dominated in a city by a few really, really large breweries that have a good distribution network and footprint, and that includes grocery stores and almost all the restaurants locally and bars, you have to then kind of do what I said a moment ago with respect to Tampa, but also within the smaller, picture here in Jacksonville, make really, really good beer to get people to come out to your location, because Jacksonville's so big and spread out. You've got to give people a reason to not just go to the grocery store to get another 6-pack of Veterans or Intuition or even Engine 15, to come out to your place and then sit down at the bar, have a beer, and then get a crowler or two or growler fills to go. So there was definitely a lot of research on my part and navigating how we would be different. And then also find a way to, of course, make sure we have customers to pay the bills and stay open and whatnot and survive. So there was a lot of research on my part prior to opening, sort of, to get the execution right.
Okay. And obviously, in that business plan, in those couple of years, I doubt that you could have foreseen anything like the situation that we're going through right now. In terms of not just Main and Six, but craft beer in Jacksonville as a whole, what have you seen? What kinds of issues are coming up? And do we have any breweries that may not be able to make it out of this?
I think in the grand scope, the answer is, I think so. And I think that's also at the national level. And it has a lot to do with, the current situation everyone's in, COVID across the country. I mean, the bubble, or saturation was coming. I mean, there's over 6,000 or 7,000 breweries all over the country now. When I first started doing the research that I was years ago, maybe 3,000 or 4,000. So, it's growing at a huge, huge clip. So for us here in Jacksonville, like any city in any market, there is going to be a saturation point. Are we there yet? I don't know yet. With Jacksonville, every city has a different amount of craft beer drinkers within it. So that helps. And that's always going to be dynamic with given the location that each business is in. But for us, Atlantic Beach Brewing Company closed a couple months ago out at the beach here. So that's one that has recently closed. Now that was prior to COVID. So the markets, will, correct itself, because that's where I think at the end of the day, those who make the best beer and then provide like a really good environment, their tap room, not just with staff, but maybe seating, all those things are very important. Beer is the most important. Those other things are not. So, or not as much rather, excuse me. So, I see that happening where the breweries who, make the best product and have the best environment, will make it out. And those who don't, it'll be noticeable by the consumer. So the consumer will be, the ultimate, judge, if you will, and determine. So, the honest answer, sure. There are going to be some breweries eventually that will, and this COVID thing may speed some of that up. We just don't know. Right now, a lot of breweries are sort of kind of hanging on the help that we've gotten from banks, the PPP, from the SBA, stuff like that. But, had that not occurred, it would have been awful for the brewing industry.
No, I agree. I actually did not know about Atlantic Beach closing. I'm actually disappointed to hear that. I was a big fan of their Mayport, which is a shame. Now, as we sit and chat, I think was it yesterday or the day before, you were cleared to open with 50% capacity, provided that you have a food truck on site. How was the process of getting that information, and what have you gone through to get your tap room ready to go?
So we're doing that today, actually. Once I get off the phone with you, I'll finish. We started yesterday, but we're going to have to, I'll start with the second answer, but to go on, to continue, move tables, obviously take chairs out, we're going to eventually expand into the building next door to us and put a small food option kitchen in there and a rooftop bar. So it lays empty currently. So we're lucky that we have some room to take some tables out and some chairs, more or less to store them, temporarily right now. That's what we're going to do. Yeah, the food truck, limiting our capacity inside. We have a small shotgun outdoor patio. We'll put some signs out to limit, the proximity of folks who are out there, having beer. But as far as the getting the information or getting it to where we are now and allowed to do this, it's been a little bit of a fight. And I give all the credit, because all the credit is due to our state guild, the Florida Brewers Guild, and our attorney that works for us, Josh Opishon. He has been at this since all the shutdown started in March, trying to get us as much as possible. So like the to-go beer ability of at least doing that as a stopgap measure to sell at least something. And then now allowing us to operate at 50% capacity with a food truck on site. Again, that was all because of, Sean Norquist, our executive director, the board, Craven, owner of Ardwolf, one of the owners, he's one of the board members, and Josh, all those board members, they've worked actively with the DVPR and the governor's office to try and get as much, help as possible. So it's, the credit is due to them, and I'm happy we're lucky because, obviously beer bars and other places can't do what breweries are doing. So we're sort of falling in this very unique window, like a restaurant, operating like a restaurant if there's a food truck here. But if it's not here, then it's still just to go.
Gotcha. And it's interesting that you mentioned a couple things. First of all, with the tables and moving them around and having to take some out. On social media, you did mention that the bar top is going to be off limits. But
Correct.
With Main and Six, one of the things, the bar is absolutely beautiful. If you've never been, I definitely recommend you go, because it's this gorgeous, almost three-sided monstrosity right in the middle. And that takes up a very significant chunk of real estate within the guest seating area. Is there going to be difficulty with kind of keeping that off limits, or is it possible, like on the sides where there are no tables, maybe allowing a couple of people to sit there? How is that probably going to work?
It's tough. It's going to be difficult. I think that the really hard, honest answer is, we won't be able to have anyone sit at any side of the bar. And you're right, it does take up a large portion of, the tap room. So our challenge is going to be spacing the tables, limiting the chair seating. Obviously, we've got tons of sanitizer because we're a brewery. So the cleaning the tables and keeping things clean is not the part. The hard part is going to be wrangling people and making sure they're not moving tables and chairs around to be by their friends or group of friends compared to another outside group that's not with them. So there's going to be some very difficult wrangling and finessing this, but yeah, not having any seating at the bar does hurt that 50% capacity, I guess, occupancy rather. And so, you're right. I love our bar. It was a really cool and fun design, and I'm proud of that from our designers aspect. But yeah, not having people there, that's a state at most restaurants. I believe that came from the state itself. So we can't. We're just going to go by their rules and say no seating at the bar. And I know it's going to upset a lot of people, but it's kind of the way it is. Right?
And then you also mentioned the rooftop bar and the construction, but that had started before the quarantine. Knowing that other construction projects have been able to continue, has your construction been able to continue, or has that been put on a standstill until everything sort of
on hold.
blows over?
We were very early on. So all we had done is some demo and some internal work. We still are waiting for the final approval from the city for approval permits for plans. So we were able to do, very, very, very simple stuff. We were able to cut the look and foundation to see if, what kind of foundation work we'll have to do. Again, we demoed a few things, but again, it was, real entry level basic stuff that was done to the building and the parking lot right next to it, where we're just waiting for the city. So, with everyone, not working a full, not just a day, but not working in the office, it's hard to get approvals so it was already a slow process with Jacksonville, with the city getting permits. So now it's going to be amplified because of this. So, we are on hold again, I guess. I don't want to say indefinitely, but I just don't know when we're going to get any notes or anything back from the permitting office.
And I find it interesting that you mentioned the permitting because you and Hyperion had a very interesting, very, very Jacksonville sort of problem in that you both had to get special exemptions due to being too close to a church or school. And I've spoken to other breweries in the state, and they've had to make some very weird changes, like moving the front door to some place that really doesn't make any sense so that they can get around these issues. Was the city difficult to work with when you were going through that? Because Jacksonville traditionally has been a good friend to beer in general and craft beer in particular. What was sort of that process like?
It was very difficult. So we were the first brewery to sort of decide on Springfield and to put an offer on our building and then to start filing the paperwork. And so we kind of bore the brunt of the worst of it. So, Alex with Hyperion, she was able to get rezoned pretty easily after us because we had set precedent. So that's the good thing on her part. For us, over 6 months, we had a zoning attorney. We were just getting our teeth kicked in, the beginning started out actually pretty smoothly. We filed all the stuff that we had to. We had our attorney help us. We did it all. Problem with Springfield is there are a lot of, I call them makeshift churches. They're sort of in buildings and they're not holding service, but I guess a religious entity owns it. So it's considered a church. And then there's plaza churches. So it's very hard to nail down, but you have to include all of them. And there are a few schools within our 1,500 foot or meter radius of our building. And so paperwork, but once we got down to the city council to start doing the rezoning portion, our council member from this district wasn't, for some reason, very, very much in favor of us. So yeah, there was a lot of heavy lifting. It took us over 6 months. We had to go through the city council 2 different times. We had some issues with the company we hired to actually do what's called a liquor distance survey and locate schools and churches, because there's so many ambiguous churches out of homes and other places, they missed them. And so then that came about, and it wasn't necessarily our fault, and it may be more so the survey company's fault for not really doing true due diligence, but that set us back and we had to start all over again. So some areas of town are very easy to work and get things done, and some areas are not. The downtown metro area is harder to get certain businesses rezoned because of, again, all those churches and other things around there. It's a long answer. Full story is even more in depth and longer, but yeah, that's the best. I sort of paraphrase it, but yeah, it was a big lift. We did it. And then again, Alex was able to sort of move through real quickly within maybe a few months. And then I think Strings went, again, a lot of them were able to sort of just right after us get right through because, again, we had done it and that was the good thing. So now they're all open and it worked out. But yeah, it was definitely oh boy, that was not a fun time.
No, I'm sure. So I will leave you with this because everybody is talking about the 50% capacity. Everybody's talking about the changes that they've been making, but it sounds like a lot of the changes are being made on the honor of the breweries themselves. Have you heard about or have you experienced any way for regulators to come through to measure and make sure that not only is distancing taking place, but that 50% mark is being adhered to strictly?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I would think that the ABT, the Alcohol Beverage Tobacco Agency, which falls under the DBTR, they're the ones that do our normal audits. They're the ones we pay our taxes to for excise tax for beer. They would be the ones, or the fire marshal, I think, would be the one for capacity. But I would say it would be a combination of the two. We're required to have a sign with our number capacity, publicly displayed. So ours is on the wall. So theoretically, they would probably come in, look at that, and then just divide it by 2 and say, okay, then do a head count. Outdoors doesn't count towards capacity, and neither does employees that are working at the time. So it's strictly patrons. So, I worry, that's one of our worries, that we would get randomly inspected or audited by either ABT or the fire marshal. I don't know if they're going to do that. I guess it's going to be probably each local area dependent, I would imagine. We do get occasionally visited by the fire marshal, and we get our semi-annual audits by ABT to count kegs. So it's not out of the question. So again, that's where the finesse came in earlier. I was telling you, making sure that we do our head counts and then tell those who come in, like, hey, you can either get to go now or you can go sit on the patio, but you just can't side any longer than your ordering time takes.
Well, thank you very much, Dennis Espinosa from Main and Six Brewing in Jacksonville. I will look forward to hearing how everything goes, and I definitely can't wait to see the expansion when that opens up. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you guys very much. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Your friends at the Florida Podcast Network want to use our platform to keep us all informed and connected. And while these conversations are greatly needed right now, and we hope they are helping you get through this trying time, we are podcast hosts, not experts in coronavirus or any other kind of medical issue. Please consult and follow the CDC's guidelines at cdc.gov. That's cdc.gov. Then please visit floridapodcastnetwork.com/coronavirus for some additional resources and ways to connect to your local community. With social distancing being our call to arms, we need to feel more connected than ever. So by visiting floridapodcastnetwork.com/coronavirus, you will help us all get through this with additional resources and ways to connect. Stay safe and healthy, and wash those hands.
Thank you so much for listening to our special coronavirus quarantine episode of the Florida Beer Podcast. We're going to try and get back to normal operation as soon as possible. In the meantime, you can find us on Instagram and Twitter. We're at Florida Beer Blog. We're on Facebook at FL Beer Blog, or email us at floridabeerblog@gmail.com. Florida Beer Podcast is a production of floridabeerblog.com and of the Florida Podcast Network. Field producer is Steve Pekala, and our executive producer and grandpa poobah is Jemmy Legagneur. Find us, rate us, buy local, and stay indoors and keep yourself safe through this very, very confusing time. Drink Florida craft.